Hi there, everyone. Happy Monday. It's 4 o'clock in New York. Donald Trump is finding out that it is not easy to get yourself out of a war you started with no end game in sight in the first place. In the face of failed peace talks and a fragile ceasefire in place, Donald Trump is choosing to escalate tensions and worsen the global oil crisis with a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Hours after the marathon peace talks with Tehran fell apart over the weekend, Donald Trump announced that starting this morning, the U.S. Navy will block the entire strait. U.S. Central Command later had to step back from Donald Trump's threat to do that, stating that U.S. forces would merely block ships going to and from Iranian ports. Still, by any measure, it is a dangerous escalation of the war, both militarily and economically. On that, the Wall Street Journal reports this, quote, "The move opens a volatile new phase in the 6-week conflict, shifting from punishing strikes on military targets to an open-ended campaign to police the strait. The prospect of such a blockade could set off a high-stakes battle that tests which side has the higher threshold for pain, Tehran or global markets. That economic pain is already being felt, with the price of oil surging past $100 a barrel as soon as the blockade was announced. But here's how Donald Trump tried to spin it and downplay the major economic impact of his war in an interview on Fox News yesterday.
The stock market has not gone down very much at all, gone down a little bit, much less than I thought. And frankly, the gas hasn't gone up as much as I thought. But regardless, even if it did, we have to stop this group of people from having, and again, it was worse because Khomeini was a total, radical, I'll be nice, maniac. He was a maniac. And you can't let them have a nuclear weapon. Right. So I just have the greatest economy ever. Everything's going along. And I say, I'm sorry. I tell my economic advisors, I say, I'm sorry, fellas. We're in great shape. We have to go and take a little journey down to Iran.
13 people have lost their lives in that little journey down to Iran. When Bartiromo pressed him as to whether or not he expects gas prices to come back down, here's what Donald Trump admitted.
So do you believe the price of oil and gas will be lower before the midterm elections?
I hope so. I mean, I think so. It could be. It could be or the same or maybe a little bit higher, but it should be around the same. I think this won't be that much longer. They're wiped out. They're wiped out.
So, according to Trump, the prices will be lower, the same, or higher by the midterms. Now, beyond the blockade, Donald Trump is also considering further attacks on Iran. That's despite the fact that we're in the middle of that 2-week ceasefire. Wall Street Journal reports this, quote, Trump and his advisors are looking at resuming limited military strikes in Iran as a way to break a stalemate in peace talks. That's according to officials and people familiar with the situation. Trump could also resume a full-fledged bombing campaign, though officials said that was less likely. Now, none of Donald Trump's actions appear to be rooted in any strategy, least of all a strategy to bring an end to the conflict or the war. It's a war that is only growing more and more unpopular with the American public by the day. A brand new poll from CBS News shows that just 36% of the country approves of Trump's handling of the war with Iran, 64% disapprove, and only 34% of Americans think that Trump has clearly explained what his goals in Iran even are. Donald Trump, struggling to find an off-ramp for his increasingly unpopular war with Iran, is where we start today. New York Times diplomatic correspondent Michael Crowley is here. Lieutenant General Mark Hertling is here as well. He served as a commanding general of the U.S. Army in Europe. Also joining us, staff writer at The Atlantic and a contributor to the Atlantic Daily newsletter, Tom Nichols is here. He's a professor emeritus of national security affairs at the U.S. Naval War College. Michael Crowley, let me ask you to take me through the reporting of J.D. Vance's failure to make progress in those peace talks.
Yeah, Nicole, and thanks for having me. Well, look, I think the fact of the failure itself was not a surprise. It was very clear that the U.S. and Iran had a huge gulf between them in terms of their public positions on the key issues that were going to be on the table in Islamabad and remain on the table. And foremost among them is what to do about the Strait of Hormuz, how to reopen it and how to manage it going forward, and whether Iran will have any role in that. And then second, the key question is Iran's nuclear program. Iran's nuclear facilities have been badly damaged or destroyed, but Iran still retains close to 1,000 pounds of highly enriched uranium that would not take very long with some centrifuges spinning to get to a level where you can make a nuclear weapon. So Vance goes over there to try to reach some agreement with the Iranians in talks that are, put together on a few days' notice, basically on the fly. Vance himself has no real diplomatic experience, certainly not prior to becoming vice president. And he goes over with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, who themselves have pretty limited experience and have failed to get deals with the Iranians in 2 previous rounds of talks. And they spend, I think it's 21 hours in Islamabad, or the whole trip, basically. And they are not able to, as everyone expected, they're not able to just get a snap agreement for something that people who have dealt with the Iranians say would take weeks to hammer out. And it sounds like what you really had was a delivering of ultimatums on both sides, laying out positions, but not a lot of give and take, compromise, and negotiation. So another round of talks ends in failure and leads to what looks like an escalation, which puts us in a position where it's kind of anyone's guess what happens next. I think that we have a waiting game now to see how Iran is going to respond to this blockade of its ports. Number one, in terms of whether it would use any kind of force or have a confrontation. And then number two, will we have another round of diplomatic talks? There have been some reports that maybe the Iranians were willing to make offers to the Trump administration on its nuclear program in particular that might be a little bit more acceptable. So would they come back to the table, and will this be like an iterative process where the two sides get closer and closer? But right now, I don't see a lot of evidence of that.
What's interesting to me, Michael Crowley, is that Trump's on Fox talking about this little journey he took to Iran. That's his quote, because of their nuclear program. I mean, before the war started, Kushner and Witkoff were negotiating over the nuclear program, and the Strait of Hormuz was open. Now it's controlled by Iran. It seems like their hand is weaker to negotiate the status of their nuclear program because Iran now controls the strait. Am I missing something?
Well, I think that's a pretty plausible argument. The counter argument would be that the war has brought Iran's economy closer to the brink of collapse, that Iran's regime is running scared. They're worried that they have been weakened to the point where they're threatened by an uprising. That's, I think, more speculative. And, we just don't see a lot of evidence of that. And people have been talking about the overthrow of the Iranian regime through various rounds of protests and military actions for a long time now. It doesn't seem like something it's a good bet to be waiting on. So I think, yes, all the evidence we see right now is that Iran has an immense point of leverage that it lacked before. And so President Trump is going to have to be prepared to make more concessions than he was before, unless he wants to go even deeper militarily into this war at greater risk to American lives and the global economy.
General Hertling, what does all this mean for the men and women of the military and their families?
Well, first, what I'd point out, Nicole, Michael said it very well. And the initial presidential tweet or social media posting had to do with closing the entire straits. That would have been a near impossible mission for the amount of forces that are there. The CENTCOM, the NAVCENT, the naval commanders in the Central Command reduced that to what I think the president meant, which was the blockading of Iranian ports, not the entire strait, which requires much less equipment, much less, fewer sailors and the kind of command and control that you need. But we've also seen that kind of tested already by the Chinese, who have made basically a demand that they be allowed to go into the Iranian ports because they have deals with Iran. So we're going to see some very interesting dynamics here in terms of this mission set, which in and of itself, when the American public hears something like they're going to blockade the straits or blockade Iranian ports, it sounds like you're putting up a wall against incoming ships and outgoing ships. That's not the case at all. That's a very difficult mission. I spent the weekend talking to a bunch of Navy friends of mine, and other than Tom Nichols, I don't have that many Navy friends, but what we determined was the amount of mission sets that this is going to require. When the Peterson, and I'm forgetting the name of the other ship, the Peterson and the Franklin, I think it's called. I'm sorry, the Murphy and the Peterson, the two destroyers went into the Straits the other day, and they said they were in mine clearing missions. That wasn't the case at all. Destroyers don't do normally mine clearing. They can launch unmanned aerial drones and sea drones to look for mines, but you don't necessarily want to put a destroyer in the water to look for mines. It was a reconnaissance mission. It was a mission to begin the dynamics of making sure you have missile defense in case new missiles from Iran or new drones from Iran come in. So the complications of any kind of a blockade is just extremely dynamic and resource intensive. Luckily, it's going to be a smaller one, but it's still, you asked the question, what does it mean for the men and women in this force that's there? It's a tough mission. And they will likely be there for a very long time if, in fact, they do start intercepting ships and conducting reconnaissance and trying to make sure that the strait remains open.